For the first time in Diablo Immortal, combat rating has become capped, and this change occurred when we first entered Inferno 1, and I imagine it's true for Inferno 2, but we will tell when we kind of get there. Now what I mean by this is that the set items, which we've known for a little bit, have a maximum combat rating of 1,145 that they can roll, and for legendary items, we're seeing more and more players reach this cap of 1,245. Now many people have brought this to my attention, whether it be through DMs, messages on Discord, YouTube, so forth, and I appreciate it. There's way too many people to thank for this. We're getting more and more people bringing this up as players get higher level, because the combat rating on pieces was increasing by 2 per Paragon level up until we reached this cap. So as more players just increase their level, we're seeing this more and more, so more people are starting to talk about it. Now, does this matter or does it affect you? Well, that depends, and it's situational. So that's why we're talking about it in the video today. Just for sake of conversation here, let's take a look at a rank 10 5-star, because this will be the maximum combat rating increase that you can have if you happen to have one of these in all 8 slots. I know that's super rare, but let's just talk about the extremes here. So if we multiply this by 8, we're going to get roughly 1900 combat rating that we're getting from having all of the max rank 10 legendary gems. On top of that, we also have bonuses from the Helliquary, and hopefully you've been keeping up to this for the best of your ability. About 1800 here. This is probably well above average if I had to guess. I run this almost every single time, except for a couple of times in the very beginning when I couldn't make it because of real life. But if we add this in, again, just to kind of factor things from an extreme perspective, this gives us a combination of 3,700. Next thing I want to talk about here is a Warband Tableau, and we're getting about 800. Again, this is going to be an extreme value, but that's giving us a total of 4,500 combat rating that's available from these sources. Now, if we look at my actual combat rating, and keep in mind, I don't have every piece maxed. This one's a few off and so forth, as well as what's required here. I don't have all of my absolutely highest combat rating pieces in, but this makes the math really easy and just nice to work with. So if we subtract 4,500 from the actual combat rating that I have, I've got 19,000 combat rating. Now that's important, right? Because when we enter Inferno 1, we need a little under 16,000. So I exceed that at this point. Obviously, I've been farming Inferno 1, so it makes sense that I exceed that. And the dungeons inside of the difficulty are also a step up, meaning you need a little more combat rating to complete those. And that number, even with the Helliquary, the Tableau, and also the legendary gems subtracted, I can still farm these dungeons during that difficulty span. And obviously, if you have some of these, it's just going to be easier and something that you can do sooner. Now, if we reach Inferno 2, or we want to pre-farm it, well, if I use that 19,000, I'm below that, and I'm really going to struggle, especially if I go into the dungeons here. So what you're going to need, if you've got reasonable gear and you kind of keep up with daily activities and farm and so forth, well, you're not going to have all max 1,245 legendary gear pieces. You're not going to have all max 1,145 set pieces, but you need a decent collection between your primary and secondary gear, as well as some of these things like Helliquary raids to bump that number up. You need a warband, or you should most likely have a warband to increase that number on the tableau, and you should have some sort of legendary gem. Do you need the best of the best? No. But if you even have 1 stars that you've ranked up as time have gone, even if you have 1,000 resonance at this point, at least you're adding combat rating in some degree. Now there's a fourth factor to this, but it makes the math a little more tough. So I just kind of left that out for the sake of the video, but I do want to mention it, okay? And that's upgrading your gear from the blacksmith. We get up to max rank 30, and what we're actually getting here at the maximum rank is 220 combat rating per piece. And again, we have 8 pieces here, so a substantial number that we can add here. Make sure that you're doing this. Make sure that you're doing some world farming, some means of getting salvage materials to sell at the blacksmith, and then upgrade your gear, because this is going to add up as well. So I really want to bring attention to using those 4 things to increase that number, but also illustrate the point that in a lot of situations, if you're somebody that's been active, this doesn't really matter, right? You're going to be over that combat rating, and the combat rating being capped at each tier isn't really affecting you. However, for players that are more casual or less active, this is a much bigger thing, because their primary and secondary gear aren't going to be as well rolled. Typically, there is some RNG involved there. They're not going to have as many salvage materials to upgrade that gear. Their legendary gems probably are not leveled as high, whether they don't farm the same amount of gem power, or maybe they don't farm normal gems to sell for platinum, or maybe they haven't invested in the game financially just to increase them because they play the game more casually. Whatever the factor may be, okay, these things are all going to add up. For a lot of active players, and so forth, this is going to be a non-factor. But for new players, casual players, this is going to be impactful. And I just want to raise awareness because we have more new players than I can recall since the start of the game, and many of them have made their way to this channel. Much appreciated. And I just want to make sure that the people are aware of this and give you some methods of how to increase this. And those are the 4 best sources. Your Helliquary raids, which can be completed in or outside of a warband. Your Ancient Tableau, which you want to do with warband members just to maximize your efficiency in getting points. So get involved with a warband. Your legendary gems, which you'll naturally increase over time, as well as upgrading those blacksmith level gears. Those are 4 really big tips. You also have secondary gear levels that you can get from completing challenge rifts, and if you're unable to complete them on your own, well, there's a lot of people that can now clear all levels of the challenge rifts. You shouldn't have too much difficulty completing those. So ask for some help in world chat, whatever it may be, shadows chat, things like that, and hopefully you can get somebody to help you raise these levels as they add combat rating as well. But from what I see in the numbers, reaching Inferno 2 should be accessible for the vast majority of players, if not early. Now, whether or not you can survive all the mechanics in the dungeons right away, that's to be seen. But as I mentioned, the threshold for these numbers does increase, and I can show you right here. We do have an Inferno 2 weapon in our tableau, and it actually has an increased combat rating. So we know that this number is going to go up in Inferno 2. And just to show you on the bottom here, the required level is 900. So this is an Inferno 2 piece. It's going to go up. So as soon as you can get in and start comfortably farming Inferno 2, then you can increase these numbers, then you can get up to the point of dungeons, and it's just kind of going to be the way the process goes for some individuals. Keep in mind that this combat rating will also affect players in PvP. Combat rating will give up to a 10% benefit to the players with higher combat rating, and if all other sources are equal, the players with the higher legendary gems will now have that advantage, meaning that lower resonance players can no longer outgrind that advantage that other individuals had by doing more open world farming, trying to turn the RNG in their favor just by amassing more items, hopefully getting lucky and closing that gap. You'll no longer be able to do that if everybody's getting max combat rating pieces. Well, the higher legendary gem is just going to be another advantage that higher resonance players are going to have innately in giving them a further damage and damage reduction, because combat rating works both ways. Now, I want to talk about 2 other quick things in regard to Blood Knight while we're here. And the first one, I've gotten a lot of comments about this, has to do with Siphon Blood. And the reason is, if you look at Siphon Blood, it says that it is a damage effect. It doesn't say anything about a buff, but I'm going to go ahead and pop Siphon Blood and look at the duration and the cooldown and so forth when I do so. Now there's a 12-second cooldown, and this duration is going to persist for a while here. Let's see, it's going to go all the way down to about 3 seconds. So I'm getting a 9-second duration from that. Now if I go ahead and remove one of my Vithus pieces, I will no longer have a 2-piece Vithus bonus. Let that text go away so you can see it. So this bonus is gone. And now when I hit Siphon Blood, still have 12 seconds remaining on the cooldown, but look when this duration is going to end. It is not going to be anywhere near that 3 seconds, okay? It's just barely over 5. So even though that tooltip does not state that it's a buff, it in fact is working as a buff. So just want to point that out because I've gotten a lot of people saying, oh, well, Vithus doesn't buff this, not going to affect it, it's just a damage skill. Well, I just want to clear that up. Second thing has to do with Blood Knight PvP. Seeing a lot of people neglect this. There's a factor of this defensive stance that many people don't know. The first is upon activation, you gain a shield that absorbs damage, and a lot of people have that in mind. So a lot of people are swapping to this using for a shield, but I see a lot of people swapping out of it. And in fact, the second part of this tip, which you can't see, I'll move this on the screen, but incoming damage is now reduced by 10%, okay? That means just being in that stance makes you take 10% less damage. Blood Knight also has the melee damage reduction. Remember that damage reduction is separated into melee or ranged, and the ranged got added relatively recently, but essentially Monk, Crusader, Barb, Blood Knight all share a much larger damage reduction than Demon Hunter, Wizard, or Necro. So this is just going to add on top of that damage reduction and make you even more tanky. I really feel like Blood Knight is a bruiser type class, especially as we get Essence Mastery. It's going to have the ability to really CC targets, do some burst damage, get out, and kind of keep itself alive through shields or other methods. So just want to point that out. I see very few people staying in this defensive stance, swapping back and forth whenever they can, and I actually think the defensive stance overall is a little more beneficial. So there's nothing wrong with really sitting in this or being in the attacker stance, swapping to the defensive stance when you engage, and just sitting in it and potentially waiting until the next resurrection or something like that. So I just want to point that out. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch, and have a great day.